The afternoon sun cast dancing shadows through the oak trees that bordered Murphy's roadside diner, a modest establishment that had served travelers and locals for over 30 years. The parking lot behind the restaurant was a mix of pickup trucks, aging sedans, and the occasional motorcycle, all baking quietly in the gentle warmth of a perfect spring day. Sarah Evans moved efficiently between tables inside the diner, her brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her uniform, a crisp white shirt and blue apron, showing the kind of attention to detail that made regular customers request her section specifically. At 28, Sarah had the kind of quiet confidence that made difficult situations seem manageable and challenging customers feel heard and valued. She was refilling coffee cups and clearing plates when she heard the distinctive sound of an expensive car engine sputtering to a stop in the parking lot. Through the window, she could see steam beginning to rise from under the hood of a sleek black Mercedes, its polished surface looking distinctly out of place among the more practical vehicles that typically frequented the diner. A few moments later, a well-dressed man in his early 50s entered the restaurant, his tailored suit and confident bearing marking him as someone accustomed to having problems solved quickly and efficiently. He approached the counter with a slightly frazzled expression of someone whose carefully planned schedule had just been disrupted by mechanical failure. "Excuse me," he said to the cashier, "I'm having some car trouble. Do you know if there's a mechanic nearby?" "Closest garage is about 15 miles up the highway," the cashier replied sympathetically. "But they close at 4 on Sundays and it's already past 3. Sarah overheard the conversation as she delivered an order to a nearby table. She glanced out the window at the Mercedes, noting the steam still rising from under the hood and the way the man kept checking his expensive watch with obvious frustration. Robert Grant, though Sarah didn't know his name yet, was the CEO of Grant Technologies, a company worth over $3 billion. He was driving back to the city after a rare weekend at his country house, already late for a conference call with international partners. The breakdown couldn't have come at a worse time. Sarah finished serving her table and approached the counter where Robert was now making phone calls, trying to arrange for emergency roadside service. "Excuse me," she said quietly, not wanting to interrupt but sensing an opportunity to help. "I couldn't help but overhear about your car trouble." Robert looked up from his phone, taking in the young waitress with her friendly but professional demeanor. "Yes, the engine just started overheating. I'm trying to get a tow truck, but apparently it could be several hours." Sarah hesitated for a moment, then made a decision that would change both their lives. "I know this might sound strange, but I studied mechanical engineering before I started working here. Would you mind if I took a look? Sometimes these issues are simpler than they seem." Robert's eyebrows rose in surprise. In his experience, waitresses at roadside diners didn't typically offer automotive expertise, but something about Sarah's quiet confidence and the genuine concern in her eyes made him consider the offer. "You studied engineering?" "At State Technical Institute," Sarah replied, unconsciously touching the small keychain attached to her apron, a habit she'd developed over the years. "I had to leave before graduating, but I learned quite a bit about engines and mechanical systems." 5 minutes later, Sarah was standing beside Robert's Mercedes with the hood raised, her sleeves rolled up and a borrowed pair of work gloves protecting her hands. She moved around the engine compartment with the systematic approach of someone who understood what she was looking at. "Here's your problem," she said, pointing to a loose radiator hose that had come partially disconnected. "This clamp has worked itself loose, probably from vibration over time. It's not getting proper coolant circulation." Robert watched in amazement as Sarah used a screwdriver from the diner's small toolkit to tighten the clamp and adjust the hose positioning. Her movements were confident and precise, the actions of someone who had done this type of work many times before. "Try starting it now," Sarah suggested, wiping her hands on a shop rag. The Mercedes purred to life immediately, running smoothly with no sign of the previous overheating. "That's incredible," Robert said, genuine gratitude evident in his voice. "Thank you so much. You've saved me hours of waiting and probably hundreds of dollars in service fees." Sarah smiled modestly. It really was a simple fix. Just happened to be in the right place at the right time. As Robert reached for his wallet to offer payment for her help, his eyes fell on the keychain attached to Sarah's apron. The small metal emblem bore the logo of State Technical Institute, one of the most prestigious engineering schools in the region. Robert froze completely, his expression shifting from gratitude to something that looked like shock mixed with deep emotion. The keychain was identical to one his daughter Emma had carried throughout high school, dreaming of the day she would earn her engineering degree from that same institution. Where are you watching this video right now? At home, at work, or outside a restaurant? Let me know in the comments below. I love hearing from each and every one of you. 5 years earlier, Sarah Evans had been standing in the dean's office at State Technical Institute, staring at a withdrawal form that represented the end of everything she'd worked towards since childhood. Her academic records showed a 3.8 GPA in mechanical engineering, with professors' notes describing her as exceptionally gifted and destined for significant contributions to the field. But academic excellence couldn't overcome the financial crisis that had devastated her family in the span of 6 months. Sarah's parents had owned a small auto repair shop where she'd grown up learning about engines, transmissions, and the intricate mechanical systems that most people took for granted. Her father, Jim Evans, had been a master mechanic who could diagnose problems by sound alone, and her mother, Linda, had managed the business side with the kind of attention to detail that kept customers coming back for decades. Sarah had always planned to earn her engineering degree and then return to modernize the family business, perhaps expanding into the emerging field of electric vehicle maintenance or starting a consulting firm that helped small shops adapt to changing automotive technology. But a series of medical emergencies had shattered those plans. Her father's heart attack had come first, requiring expensive surgery and months of recovery during which he couldn't work. Then her mother was diagnosed with cancer, beginning a brutal cycle of treatments that drained both their savings and their insurance coverage. Within a year, her parents were gone, leaving behind medical bills that exceeded $200,000 and a failing business that Sarah couldn't maintain while attending school full-time. At 19, Sarah faced an impossible choice: complete her education and lose the family home and business, or sacrifice her degree to settle her parents' debts and care for her younger brother Marcus, who was only 14 and had nowhere else to go. The decision had never really been a choice at all. Sarah sold the auto repair shop for a fraction of its value, used the proceeds to pay down the medical debt, and moved with Marcus to a small apartment near the high school where he could finish his education. She found work at Murphy's Diner because it offered the flexibility to care for Marcus while providing steady income and health insurance. "Sarah, you're throwing away your future," her academic advisor had pleaded during their final meeting. "You're one of our most promising students. This gap year could easily become permanent." "It's not a gap year," Sarah had replied quietly. "It's a different path." For 5 years, that different path had meant working double shifts when possible, helping Marcus with homework every evening, and using her mechanical knowledge to supplement their income by repairing motorcycles and small engines for neighbors who couldn't afford professional service. Sarah never complained about her circumstances, but she also never stopped learning. She checked out advanced engineering textbooks from the public library, followed industry publications online, and maintained her understanding of mechanical systems through practical application rather than classroom theory. Marcus, now 19 and preparing for his final semester of high school, had no idea how much his sister had sacrificed for his stability. He knew Sarah had attended college briefly and that she was good with cars, but he'd never understood the full scope of what she'd given up to ensure his success. Meanwhile, Robert Grant was living a very different kind of loss. 3 years earlier, his wife Margaret had died in a skiing accident, leaving him to raise their daughter Emma alone while running a technology company that employed over 12,000 people worldwide. Robert had thrown himself into work with the intensity of someone trying to outrun grief, building Grant Technologies into one of the most innovative firms in the industry. But his success had come at the cost of connection with Emma, who was now a senior in high school and increasingly distant from the father who seemed to communicate primarily through financial support and academic expectations. Emma had always been passionate about engineering, inspired by childhood visits to construction sites and manufacturing facilities where she'd seen her father's designs come to life. She'd earned early admission to State Technical Institute and planned to study mechanical engineering with a focus on sustainable manufacturing. But as Emma's graduation approached, Robert realized he had no real understanding of her dreams beyond the general knowledge that she wanted to be an engineer. Their conversations had become perfunctory exchanges about grades, college preparations, and logistics rather than the kind of meaningful discussions that might have helped him understand what drove his daughter's ambitions. The weekend at the country house, which had led to his breakdown near Murphy's Diner, had been Robert's attempt to reconnect with Emma before she left for college. But the weekend had been filled with awkward silences and missed opportunities for real conversation, leaving Robert feeling like he'd failed as a father just as completely as he'd failed as a husband to be present during Margaret's final years. The sight of Sarah's keychain, identical to Emma's most treasured possession, had triggered a recognition that went beyond simple coincidence. Here was a young woman who clearly possessed the same passion for engineering that drove his daughter, but whose path had been derailed by circumstances beyond her control. For the first time in years, Robert found himself thinking about talent and opportunity in terms that had nothing to do with corporate strategy or market advantage. In the days following the roadside encounter, Robert Grant found himself returning to Murphy's Diner with a frequency that surprised even him. He told himself it was convenient. The diner was on his route to the country house. But the truth was more complicated. Robert was captivated by Sarah's quiet competence and the way she approached every task, from refilling coffee cups to helping elderly customers navigate the menu, with the same methodical precision she'd shown while diagnosing his car trouble. During his third visit, Robert arrived to find Sarah in the parking lot after her shift, working on an old pickup truck that belonged to one of the diner's regular customers. She was lying on her back beneath the vehicle, her voice muffled as she called out instructions to the truck's owner. "Try it now, Mr. Patterson. The starter should engage properly." The truck started immediately, and Robert watched as Sarah rolled out from underneath, her uniform now stained with motor oil, but her expression satisfied with a job well done. "How much do I owe you, Sarah?" the elderly man asked, reaching for his wallet. "Nothing, Mr. Patterson. You're on a fixed income, and this only took 20 minutes. Just promise me you'll have someone check that transmission fluid level next week." Robert waited until Mr. Patterson had driven away before approaching Sarah. "That was kind of you," he said, "but you shouldn't be working for free." Sarah looked up, surprised to see the well-dressed stranger from earlier in the week. "Mr. she began, realizing she'd never learned his name. "Grant, Robert Grant. And you're Sarah, according to your name tag." "It's nice to see you again, Mr. Grant. And I wasn't really working for free. Mr. Patterson brings his granddaughter here for lunch every Sunday. She's 8 years old and wants to be a mechanic when she grows up. Helping him helps her believe that goal is possible." Robert studied Sarah's face, noting the genuine warmth in her expression when she talked about the little girl's dreams. "You make it sound like mechanical work is about more than just fixing things." "Isn't it?" Sarah asked, beginning to gather her tools. "When someone's car breaks down, you're not just repairing a machine. You're restoring their ability to get to work, to pick up their children, to live their lives. There's dignity in that kind of problem solving." Over the following weeks, Robert learned more about Sarah's unofficial role in the community. She helped single mothers diagnose car problems so they wouldn't be overcharged at repair shops. She taught high school students basic automotive maintenance in the diner's parking lot after her shifts. She even consulted on mechanical issues for the local volunteer fire department, whose aging equipment often needed creative solutions. "Sarah's got a gift," Dolores, the diner's owner, told Robert during one of his visits. "She could be making 3 times what I pay her if she worked at one of those fancy dealerships in the city. But she stays here because she knows this community needs her." Robert began to understand that Sarah's mechanical expertise was just one facet of a broader intelligence that encompassed problem-solving, teaching, and leadership. She approached every challenge with the same systematic thinking that had impressed him during their first encounter. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a professor from State Technical Institute, visited the diner one afternoon specifically to speak with Sarah. Word of the young waitress's engineering knowledge had reached the academic community through a network of former classmates and professors who remembered her exceptional potential. "Sarah," Dr. Walsh said, settling into a booth after the lunch rush had ended, "I've been hearing remarkable things about your work in the community. Would you consider returning to school? We could arrange financial aid, and your practical experience would be invaluable in our program." Sarah listened politely to the offer, but her response was immediate and firm. "Dr. Walsh, I appreciate the opportunity, but my brother is still in high school. My commitments here aren't finished yet." But Sarah, you're wasting your talents serving coffee and fixing cars in parking lots. Am I? Sarah asked gently. Because it seems to me that I'm using my talents exactly where they're needed most. Robert, who had been sitting nearby and couldn't help overhearing the conversation, felt a profound shift in his understanding of success and purpose. Here was someone who had consciously chosen community impact over personal advancement, service over status. That evening, Robert called Emma for their weekly check-in, but instead of their usual discussion about college preparations, he found himself asking different questions. Emma, when you think about being an engineer, what do you hope to accomplish? There was a pause before Emma answered. I want to solve problems that matter, Dad. I want to build things that help people. That's exactly what I hoped you'd say, Robert replied, thinking of Sarah's work with Mr. Patterson's truck in her informal classes for local teenagers. For the first time in months, father and daughter had a conversation that lasted more than 10 minutes, one that helped Robert understand that Emma's engineering dreams were rooted in the same desire to serve others that drove Sarah's daily choices. Robert began to see Sarah not just as an impressive individual, but as a reminder of what his own daughter might become if she was given the right opportunities and encouragement to follow her convictions rather than conventional expectations of success. 2 months after their first meeting, Robert Grant made a decision that his executive team would later describe as uncharacteristically personal. He arranged to meet Sarah during her afternoon break, arriving at Murphy's Diner with a folder containing what he believed was an offer she couldn't refuse. Sarah, he began as they sat in a quiet corner booth, I've been giving a lot of thought to our conversations about engineering and problem solving. I'd like to offer you a position with Grant Technologies. Sarah set down her coffee cup, immediately sensing the weight of what Robert was about to propose. Mr. Grant, I appreciate any opportunity, but I should mention that I don't have a completed degree. I know, Robert replied, opening the folder to reveal a formal job offer. But you have something more valuable than credentials. You have practical experience and natural ability. I'm offering you a position as a project engineer in our manufacturing division with a starting salary of $85,000 annually, plus full benefits. Sarah's eyes widened as she scanned the offer letter. The salary alone was more than triple what she earned at the diner, enough to change her and Marcus's lives completely. This is incredibly generous, she said carefully, but may I ask why you're offering this to me? Robert leaned forward, his expression earnest. Because I've watched you solve problems with creativity and efficiency that our highly credentialed engineers struggle to match. Because you understand that engineering is about serving people, not just building impressive systems. And because, he paused, then continued with unusual vulnerability, because you remind me of why my daughter wants to be an engineer. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, studying the job offer while Robert waited with the expectation that she would, of course, accept immediately. Mr. Grant, she finally said, I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll give me an honest answer. Of course. If you hadn't seen me fix your car that day, if you only knew me as the waitress who served your coffee, would you be making this offer? Robert opened his mouth to respond, then stopped, realizing the complexity of the question. Probably not, he admitted, but that doesn't make the offer less genuine. Your talents deserve recognition. Sarah closed the folder and slid it back across the table. Mr. Grant, I'm grateful for your confidence in me, but I have to decline. Robert stared at her in disbelief. Sarah, this could transform your life. You'd be working in your field, using your education, earning enough to secure your future. Would I be? Sarah asked gently. Or would I be the waitress you decided to rescue because you felt sorry for her circumstances? That's not what this is about. Isn't it, at least partially? Sarah's tone remained kind but firm. Mr. Grant, you're a successful businessman who saw potential in an unexpected place. That speaks well of your character. But I need to know that any success I achieve is based on my abilities, not on someone's sympathy for my situation. Robert felt frustrated and genuinely confused. But this is recognition of your abilities. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. Maybe it is. But it's also offered because you feel I deserve better than my current circumstances. And while I appreciate that sentiment, I'm not convinced that what I'm doing now is somehow less valuable than what I'd be doing in your corporate office. She gestured toward the diner around them. Mr. Grant, in the past month, I've taught 3 teenagers how to change oil and check tire pressure, skills that could save them hundreds of dollars over the years. I've helped Mrs. Morrison diagnose a problem with her van that was keeping her from getting to her dialysis appointments. I fixed the coffee machine here at the diner, which preserved jobs for 4 people during a slow season. Robert listened with growing understanding of what Sarah was saying. I'm not opposed to advancement or better opportunities, Sarah continued, but I need to finish what I started here. My brother Marcus graduates from high school in 6 months. Once he's settled in college and doesn't need my daily support, then I can consider what comes next for me. What if the opportunity isn't available then? Sarah smiled with the quiet confidence that Robert had come to recognize as her defining characteristic. Then I'll trust that the right opportunity will present itself when the timing is right. I've learned that forcing situations usually doesn't lead to sustainable success. As Robert prepared to leave, Sarah added one final thought. Mr. Grant, if you really want to help someone like me, consider creating opportunities for people who don't have the chance to impress you in parking lots. There are probably dozens of talented individuals in your own community whose abilities haven't been discovered yet. Walking to his car, Robert realized that Sarah had just given him a lesson in values that no business school had ever taught. She had chosen purpose over profit, commitment over convenience, and integrity over advancement. For the first time in his corporate career, Robert had encountered someone whose priorities couldn't be influenced by traditional incentives. And instead of feeling rejected, he found himself respecting her even more. 6 weeks after Sarah's refusal of his job offer, Robert Grant made a decision that surprised everyone who knew him. Instead of moving on to other priorities, he spent those weeks quietly observing Sarah's work in the community and developing a deeper understanding of what motivated her choices. The result was an invitation that arrived at Murphy's Diner on a Tuesday morning, addressed to Sarah in formal business letterhead. What's this about? Sarah asked when Robert appeared at the diner later that day. It's an invitation to speak at the Grant Foundation's annual Community Innovation Summit, Robert explained. We host it every year to recognize individuals who are making significant contributions to their communities through practical problem solving and service. Sarah looked skeptical. Mr. Grant, I appreciate the thought, but I'm not really a public speaker. You don't need to be, Robert replied. We're not looking for polished presentations. We want authentic stories about real impact. Your work here, the mechanical training you provide, the way you help people solve problems they can't afford to outsource, that's exactly the kind of innovation we want to highlight. The summit was held at the Grand Ballroom of the Downtown Convention Center with an audience of 300 business leaders, community organizers, and foundation representatives. Sarah had never spoken to a group larger than the dozen teenagers who occasionally gathered for her informal automotive classes. Just tell them what you told me about dignity and problem solving, Robert encouraged her as they stood backstage. Share why you chose to stay in your community instead of pursuing conventional advancement. When Sarah stepped onto the stage, wearing a simple navy dress that Emma Grant had helped her choose, she carried no notes and had no prepared speech. She simply began talking about the intersection of mechanical knowledge and community service. 3 months ago, a gentleman's expensive car broke down in our parking lot, she began, not mentioning that the gentleman was sitting in the front row. It was a simple fix, a loose hose clamp, but it reminded me that engineering isn't really about complex systems. It's about understanding how things work and helping them work better. She talked about Mr. Patterson's truck and the lesson it provided for his granddaughter. She described the satisfaction of teaching practical skills to people who couldn't afford formal training. She explained how her incomplete engineering education had led to a different kind of education in community leadership and service. People sometimes ask why I didn't finish college, why I don't pursue traditional engineering careers. Sarah continued, her confidence growing as she spoke. The answer is that I learned something important when my parents died. Education isn't just about what you study in classrooms. It's about what you do with what you know. The audience was completely silent, captivated by Sarah's authentic perspective on success and service. I work as a waitress and I'm proud of that work, but I also use my mechanical knowledge to help people solve problems they can't solve alone. I teach skills to young people who might not otherwise have access to that knowledge. I contribute to my community in ways that feel meaningful to me. Sarah paused, looking out at the audience of successful professionals. I'm not saying that traditional career paths are wrong, but I am saying that there are many ways to use our talents to make a difference. Sometimes the most important work happens in parking lots and community centers, not in corporate boardrooms. When she finished speaking, the applause was immediate and sustained. But more than the applause, Sarah was struck by the number of people who approached her afterward with stories of their own community work, their own decisions to prioritize service over conventional success. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the Dean of Engineering at State Technical Institute, was among those who sought Sarah out. Miss Evans, that was extraordinary. Would you be interested in developing a community outreach program for our engineering students? We need someone who understands both technical knowledge and practical application. I'd be interested in discussing it, Sarah replied, but any program would need to be based here, in this community. The students would need to learn by working with real people on real problems. As the evening concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Robert approached Sarah with yet another offer, but this one was different from his previous proposals. Sarah, I want to make you a proposition, not a job offer this time, but a partnership. He pulled out a business plan that he'd been developing since their conversation about creating opportunities for undiscovered talent. The Grant Foundation wants to establish a community technical education center right here in your area. It would offer practical engineering and mechanical training to people who can't access traditional education. You would design and direct the program with full autonomy over curriculum and approach. Sarah read through the proposal, her excitement growing as she understood the scope of what Robert was suggesting. This would serve people like the teenagers you're already teaching, but with real resources and support, Robert continued. You'd have workshops, tools, instructional materials, and the ability to offer certificates that employers would recognize. What would you get out of this partnership? Sarah asked. The satisfaction of knowing we're identifying and developing talent that might otherwise be overlooked. And, Robert added with a smile, my daughter Emma has asked if she can intern with your program before she starts college. She wants to understand what engineering looks like at the community level. Sarah looked up from the proposal, tears in her eyes. Mr. Grant, this isn't charity or rescue, is it? No, Robert replied firmly. This is recognition that you've already built something valuable, and we want to help you build it bigger. This is about amplifying work that's already making a difference. For the first time since Robert had known her, Sarah didn't need to consider her response carefully. Yes, she said immediately. Yes, I accept. The audience, which had been lingering nearby and overheard the conversation, erupted in applause once again. But this time, Sarah barely heard it. She was already envisioning the workshops she would create, the students she would teach, and the impact they could have together. How do you feel knowing the truth? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to Hidden Heroine so you never miss incredible stories like this one. 1 year later, the Sarah Evans Community Technical Education Center occupied a converted warehouse on the outskirts of town, its large bay doors open to let in fresh air and the sound of productive work. What had once been empty industrial space now hummed with the activity of classes, workshops, and hands-on learning that connected theoretical knowledge with practical application. Sarah stood in the main workshop area, watching Emma Grant work alongside Marcus and 3 other students to rebuild the engine of a donated motorcycle. At 19, Emma had deferred her college enrollment for a year to help establish the program, discovering that community-based engineering education was exactly the kind of work she wanted to pursue long-term. Sarah, the carburetor is clean, but I think we need to adjust the float level, Emma called out, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had learned to trust her own mechanical instincts. What does the manual say about float specifications for this model? Sarah replied, following her standard practice of guiding students toward finding answers, rather than simply providing them. Marcus, now a freshman at State Technical Institute thanks to a scholarship from the Grant Foundation, split his time between his own studies and helping teach younger students at the center. The boy who had once been Sarah's primary responsibility had become her partner in building something larger than either of them had imagined. The program had grown beyond Sarah's wildest expectations. Local high schools sent students for advanced mechanical training, adults seeking career changes enrolled in evening programs, Even established mechanics attended workshops to learn about electric vehicle maintenance and other emerging technologies. But perhaps most importantly, the center had become a proving ground for a different approach to education, one that valued practical problem solving as much as theoretical knowledge, community service as much as individual achievement. Robert visited regularly, often bringing Grant Technologies engineers who were developing new manufacturing processes. The collaboration between corporate innovation and community-based learning had produced several patents and led to improved designs for everything from automotive components to agricultural equipment. "You know what I've learned this year?" Robert told Sarah as they watched students work on various projects around the workshop. "I spent decades thinking that success meant moving people away from their communities, up corporate ladders, into positions of individual prominence. And now," Sarah asked, adjusting a work light for a student who was learning to read electrical schematics, "now I understand that real success might mean helping people become more valuable to the communities they're already part of. Not everyone needs to be a CEO or a corporate engineer, but everyone deserves the chance to develop their talents and contribute meaningfully." Emma approached them, wiping oil from her hands with a shop rag that bore the center's logo, a wrench and a graduation cap intertwined. "Sarah, I've been thinking about my college plans," Emma said. "State Tech has agreed to let me design an independent study program that combines my engineering coursework with continued work here at the center. I want to specialize in community-based technical education." Sarah smiled, remembering her own dreams of returning to modernize her family's auto repair business. Emma was choosing a path that honored both technical excellence and community service, just as Sarah had learned to do. "That sounds perfect," Sarah replied. "The center will always need engineers who understand that the best solutions are the ones that serve real people in real situations." As the day ended and students began cleaning their work areas, Sarah reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought her here. She had set out to sacrifice her engineering dreams for family responsibility, only to discover that true engineering meant exactly what she had been doing all along, solving problems that mattered for people who needed help. The keychain from State Technical Institute still hung from her belt, but now it was accompanied by keys to the center, to the workshop, and to a future she had never imagined but had somehow been preparing for all her life. A simple act of kindness can open the door to an entire future. Outside, the spring evening was warm and full of promise, much like the afternoon when a broken-down Mercedes had brought together two people who needed to learn from each other about the real meaning of success. If you believe that kindness and determination always create miracles, please subscribe to Hidden Heroine. Let's spread these heartwarming stories together.